do that. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Mills. I'm the Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute, GInI. GInI is the world's leading professional certification and business accreditation organization in the world. And so I'm glad to have you here with us today for this webinar. So today we're going to have with us Teresa and Richard Spangler of Plazabridge Group. And Teresa and Richard are going to be presenting key findings from a recent executive survey they conducted on growth and innovation trends in organizations, where they had over 650 different executive leaders respond to the survey. And so that has produced a number of key findings and insights that we're going to explore together. Before I start, let me introduce Teresa and Richard to you. So Teresa is the founder and CEO of Plazabridge Group, and for many years has been a real driving force behind innovation and growth. She wears multiple hats as a social entrepreneur, an innovation expert, a growth strategist, an author, and a speaker. She's especially passionate about helping entrepreneurs and corporate innovators drive success. She shares her insights on these topics and more as a member of the Forbes Technology Council. Teresa has worked for global brands like the Tom Peters Company, one of the first design thinking gurus there, and was employee number 23 at Red Hat Software, where she held senior executive positions and was responsible for leading revenue growth pre and post IPO. In addition, she's founded and led a number of entrepreneurial organizations through growth milestones, including venture capital funding, IPOs, innovation consultancies, and a technical services company. She's the author of the book, All That I Am Now That I Know, 17 Life Lessons for Entrepreneurs, and a contributing author of GInI's The Other Side of Growth, and Innovators' Responsibilities in an Emerging World. So I'm glad to have Teresa with us. Richard Spangler is a leading business development consultant and a recognized change accelerator who creates actionable results. Also a founder of Plazabridge Group, he has an intense desire to help growth companies migrate through the maze of issues and help them to help the executive and entrepreneurs accelerate into success while minimizing errors. Richard has expertise in product strategy and management, entrepreneurship, and mergers and acquisitions. He has 30 years of experience in large corporate branding, beginning with product management, corporate development, acquisitions for Compaq Computer. And then after that, he was program director for wireless strategy at IBM, where he redefined the wireless application business there. And there he continued as the worldwide brand manager, overseeing the Aptiva consumer product and new licensing programs for the IBM logo. After IBM, Richard leveraged his extensive experience in web merchandising technology and strategic management to create 6 different startups, including Planet Portal, Square Loop, Creative Leadership Adventures, Interpretus, and his current nonprofit, Pole Flyers. So with that introduction, I would like to turn the floor over to Teresa and Richard and give it to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. And I'm going to share my screen and let me know that you can see this. And everybody can see that okay?
Yes.
Barbara. So first and foremost, in the chat, we have allows you to download this particular report. And Richard and I are going to go through more of the recommendations and the key findings on the qualitative level of the report, but I did want to share that you can get a copy of the report and that the survey items, and as Anthony noted, that we had more than 650 respondents, which was surprising to us. We didn't expect to get the just the numbers, the sheer numbers of respondents that we got. So one, we were pleased with that. Two, I think what, I'm just gonna scroll through this, what it indicated to us is that we're hitting a hot button that you'll see in the report, certain aspects of the report and the respondents' notations are a little bit different than the qualitative. And so what we want to do is go through the qualitative answers. We'll share a little bit about the survey results and then give you a chance to ask questions. And we want to make this interactive, so Anthony may interject some questions as well throughout. So first and foremost, groundbreaking innovation takes time, patience, and funding. And I bring this up, I love this book, Think Again by Adam Grant. I bring this up because these were some of the most noted needs and challenges in the survey, especially in the qualitative section, that time, resources, patience from the executive teams, and funding were some of the key challenges. So as I said, we got 658 respondents. What I want to do is allow Richard Spangler to go through some of the key findings and some of the recommendations or opportunities that we saw in that. And then we'll go through a little bit more of the qualitative. So Richard, I'll let you go through this.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to present these findings to you. I encourage interaction on these. Any questions, any comments or discussions around each one of these is certainly welcome. So I'll get started right off with the kind of the first finding, and that is that conflict between innovation and execution dominates the current business environment. We found quite a lot of reaction that executives have a real hard time balancing executing on the business, meeting the quarterly and periodic successes of the companies that they have to publish in their financials, and yet still leaving time and effort to innovate over time. There was a lot of kind of inconsistency in the way they reacted to that. On the one hand, they want to do innovation, and yet they would say, well, but we have to execute on the business. Number two, the need to collaborate with a larger network of partners, customers, and constituents is seen as critical to successful innovation. I think this derives principally from a reaction to maybe Silicon Valley and to some of the success stories of geographic ecosystems of innovation. Individual companies now are starting to realize that it takes an ecosystem of partners outside of the organization to facilitate innovation and to make it happen in any kind of meaningful way. Innovation cannot happen by itself. You cannot do it alone. And some of the executives that we surveyed are starting to realize that they have to come up with new strategies on how to reach out to an ecosystem. One certainly having how do you define that ecosystem? I think they're grappling with that. Leadership and innovation starts at the top and must be integral to company culture. It kind of gets to number one, back to number one imagine if a leader stood up and said, listen, we value innovation and we value, outside in thinking, but wait a minute, we have to meet our weekly and monthly and quarterly goals. It provides kind of a mixed message between that. And so the reaction really has to be that leaders have to clearly define the priorities with respect to innovation and execution and clearly define that balance. Innovation is used in multiple contexts, from novel idea generation to incremental system improvement. So the word innovation is often thrown around in companies kind of willy-nilly, but the important thing here is that the leadership define what innovation means to the organization and what does it involve? Does it involve a long-term, far-reaching market disruption innovation, or does it mean we have to simply improve on an incremental engineering project, or does it require cutting costs in the supply chain? The executives that we surveyed recognize that as something critical to innovation in their company. A large segment of respondents view innovation as the domain of special projects. we saw a lot of response saying that innovation is really something that becomes a special project that then potentially gets back to the regular operations of the company, and consequently that it starts with a special project and then migrates into the company. It is apparently the general construct of the way innovation works in the survey and the survey respondents that we had. With respect to, I just got a question. So the question is, how does that relate to developed and developing economies, especially with the idea of, I believe, special projects or idea generation? I think with respect to the two types of economies, again, I think it's absolutely critical that the leadership of whatever organization defines what is meant by innovation and what is the measure of success in innovation. Because I think the resources often constrain the organization in terms of how they view innovation. And in the developing economies, they might not have the resources, they might not have the ecosystems, and but that doesn't mean you can't innovate. It certainly means that you have to define it in different terms, and if you spend time up front defining it, and defining it accurately and clearly, then I think you have a good chance of making progress. How much progress is certainly up for debate on any kind of innovation. Innovation is a process, not necessarily an end goal. A large segment of respondents view innovation as domains of special projects. I mentioned respondents take one of two positions. Innovation is a discrete process versus innovation is pervasive in the company culture and act upon continuously. So there is a recognition, and it does get back to the number one on our key findings list innovation could be a special projects, discrete event where you take 10 guys or 10 people and you put them in a corner and you say, hey, come up with some innovation. And then when they come back with something, that's the innovation and that's where it ends. Or it becomes inherent in the culture of the organization. It becomes part of the way the organization evolves. One of the antidotes to the special project viewpoint is many companies will allow their employees to spend 15% of their time on innovation and creative pursuits within the organization, which does encourage everyone to participate in innovation. And it encourages a continuous process of innovation and ideation within the organization, and kind of counters that special projects role. They're not mutually exclusive, obviously, but there is a growing realization that it has to be continuous in some manner. Number 7, an emerging source for innovation, for example, ESG strategies, is gaining awareness. So often innovation can be jump-started or kick-started by an external trend in the marketplace, and recognition of that can lead to innovation within any organization. One of the current trends is ESG, which is environmental sustainability and governance, is impacting the way companies operate, and in fact is impacting the way companies are receiving investments. So naturally that offers a market opportunity or a market-driven opportunity to create new innovations. Innovation skills are in high demand, especially with existing employees. For those companies that do realize that that innovation is a continuous process and something necessary to support the company, support the business over time. The skills that are required from everyone are being recognized, and that everyone has to be at least aware of how innovation evolves and how everyone can contribute to innovation within the company. And I think GInI is a perfect example of answering that need with education and certification. Number 9, support for innovation development often comes from outside the organization. Again, it gets back to this recognition that an ecosystem is critical to innovation within the company, and that that bringing in outside organizations or outside influences, whether they be market, whether they be investment, whether they be additional companies that exist in the marketplace, is critical to jumpstart that innovation and accelerate innovation with the company. So the recognition is that executives and leaders within organizations need to take an outside in viewpoint, and which basically means look outside the organization for additional ideas and additional collaborations to help with innovation. Number 10, most respondents feel resources are in place to catch new innovative ideas. Essentially what this means is companies and leaders know that they're good executors. If you have a successful company and you're meeting financial goals, you're good at execution. And so they recognize that if they had innovation that exists in special projects or emerges outside the organization, that they have the resources and the capabilities to catch that innovation and incorporate it into the organization. I having worked for IBM for many years, that IBM was outstanding at that. They were an execution machine and could take new market innovations and incorporate it into the fundamental operations of the business. And so I think the leaders recognize that they have that. They struggle, I think, with where to get the innovation and how to nurture that collaborative ecosystem outside the organization. Number 11, many still feel the stigma of innovation failure leads to job failure. That came across quite apparent, that even though we talk a lot about fail often, fail fast, and move on and learn and use it as a learning process, that executives and business leaders still consider it a high risk proposition to champion an innovation within a company, because if it fails, it hurts their career. But you know, I guess I can think from a personal standpoint that when you see companies like SpaceX blowing up rockets, you know, one right after another, and accepting those failures as progress and innovation, maybe we still can move past this particular stigma. But the survey that we received, and the respondents clearly indicate that still exists within organizations.
Excellent. Go ahead. You can ask a question.
Yeah, well, I have a number of questions, and we can go back and forth, you know, on these. But so I just want to step through and ask some questions about each one. And really, I want to get at the why behind a lot. So number one, we have this conflict between innovation and execution in the business environment. What do you think is the root cause here? Is it a structural problem in the organization? Is it a cultural problem? Why do you think we're still having this conflict?
Well, I think it's both, really. I mean, from a structural standpoint, when you have to report the status of the business to the outside world or the financial world on a quarterly basis, that you just naturally tend to operate on a quarterly basis. In fact, I know from experience that discussions of innovation always seem to emerge at the beginning of the quarter and somehow get short rift or slided towards the end of the quarter because of the requirement for reporting on a quarterly basis. And this is not a new idea, but it still exists, and it's still a source of challenge for business leaders.
Yeah, but it sounds like there's a structure element to it as well. Like there's because there are a lot of organizations that struggle with this less because structurally they have set up processes and groups and things to deal with this, and they have protected those, if you will, I guess, structurally in their own sort of, it's a different set of metrics they're working against. They have their own separate budget. So, I think you're right in the majority of organizations, but I do think there's some solutions out there.
One of the, I was able to participate in a conference last week with the DuPont innovation head. The role she takes is the CTO and head of sustainability. And she brings up, as little as 5 years ago, DuPont wouldn't tolerate because they were looking for immediate ROI on innovation. And they didn't have the structure or even the really thinking about the domain expertise that they wanted, where they wanted to place this emphasis. And it wasn't about putting so much emphasis on one big idea, because the payback on that one big idea had to be so great, but to play with multiple ideas that were going to impact the business and give them time to iteratively grow, that became more successful. But she also brings out that the CEO's mentality and culture and his acceptance of that, and not focusing on the return immediately, but looking at that longevity of the return and what's going to impact them in the future, was critical. So I think that's the shift that needs to happen.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right. And that example from DuPont is like, it's a cultural change, and culturally understanding that, innovation and is investment on a bunch of, little things that you're developing and growing, and they will take time, and that takes patience. And so you need a different structural approach to protect that. But it starts with the cultural understanding, and then it moves on to the structural arrangement to protect for that. And I think that helps a lot of organizations, address this conflict that they otherwise have if they don't have this cultural and structural approach in place. So
I think that cultural aspect specifically, with respect to the 15%, the idea of everybody in the organization, irrespective of their position in the organization, have the latitude. 15% of their job can be innovation and creativity and ideation. And Barbara's right in the sense that her comment about, leave innovation to the R&D and everybody else stay out of it, is I think not the best approach. But you do have to shift culturally. It is quite something to reward or encourage every single individual in the organization to innovate around what they're doing in some way.
And Barbara, to Barbara's point here, Barbara, you're so right. The R&D group is for innovation. The criticality of having a pipeline of innovation and innovation ideas and IP is so important. That's, I think, where outside-in influence can help, is that it shouldn't just stay in R&D. R&D has a critical component and a critical voice in this whole innovation process, and you don't want to lose that. But it's a very good point that it's is it real world over here in R&D? How do you get this stuff out the door and into a working flow? And so these ideas are getting out, these assets are not sitting there dormant. And I think is that your point, Barbara? Thank you.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that innovation is a distributed phenomenon. That innovation centralized is not nearly as efficient over the long term as a decentralized innovation culture, and infrastructure.
Right, and when it's purely centralized, it can become detached from the overall organization as well. And that kind of brings us back to your sixth point. Your sixth point was about special, you indicating that a lot of leaders still see innovation as purely domain of special projects. And there's no doubt that there are some major transformations that do involve special projects, but you seem to indicate there's space here for something else. So what is that? What is it that's not a special project that you're doing innovation differently? And I think that also relates to one of the other points you had, where innovation was happening in multiple contexts. Point 4, which one was it about being? Well, let's go with number 6. So that special projects versus not, where it's embedded into the culture. What does that look like? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I would say, and I'll let Richard chime in. Special projects, in the context of the way that we're seeing the answers and what could or should maybe be, special projects are closer to today's current business need. So you have innovation, but that innovation is not broad-based, big idea, 50 million to a 500 million. How am I going to get 50 to a $500 million big idea of top line growth? Where special projects might have more iteratively to current day-to-day business innovation projects. Richard, is that how you saw that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I also think that if we get to the why, if I were to conjecture as to the what's behind this issue is, I think it is almost a risk aversion tactic that hey, yeah, we're doing innovation, but it's a special project over there, so I don't have to risk my executive career on what's going on over there because it's kind of contained. And I mean, that's why a lot of companies hire consultants to come in and do the special projects so they can blame them on if anything happens. But I think you can see, or at least kind of infer from this information also, is that they know that is not sufficient. Maybe it's necessary, but not sufficient for an innovation culture or an innovation success in a big way. There is positives, though. The special projects can be an outside-in special project. In other words, bringing in from the outside a group of individuals or perspectives to influence the organization as it works on its normal path. But it also, facilitates the need for developing a broader ecosystem. Special projects are often designed specifically to create a broader ecosystem of knowledge and influence within the organization. So I think it can be leveraged properly with the right perspective and the right understanding of what it really is capable of doing and impacting within the organization.
Very good. So then I wanted to talk about, it was your sixth finding where you identified this dichotomy in how innovation is actually practiced in. Either it's a discrete process or it's kind of blended into the whole culture and acted on constantly, which seems to indicate the leaders view it as black and white. It's one or the other, one approach or the other approach. So in your own experience, do you think there's a right or wrong answer there? Is there a place for a balance between both approaches, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I think first the number 6 was a summation of the response we got from the executives. So I think the executives, that at least in our survey, think of it in that dichotomy way, right? So and I think that illustrates maybe the educational requirements that they have for on innovation, the maturity of their innovation thought. Because I agree, I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think that it's a blended perspective, and that managing that blend in terms of how it best fits your organization and how it best fits your objectives for the organization as an executive determines really what that mixture looks like. And it very much is a mixture. And in terms of right or wrong or best or better, it really depends on what the organization wants to try to do. I'm a firm believer that leveraging both in a mix is the way to go.
All right, yeah. Teresa, did you want to add to that?
The only thing I was going to add is that, engaging in the engagement process for your employee base, it's like, if they're not engaged, there's times when you want the discrete process and you don't want it to touch day to day. You don't really want to involve too many people too soon. As you start to open that door, though, and in a more pervasive innovation process, engaging the employee base is highly, it makes it more successful if they are totally engaged in the process of where we're going. And so I think it has to do with, again, that culture. Are you building a culture where you want more highly engaged employees, you want them there for the long term, and you're upskilling them, because that's critical. You can't, if you throw stuff out the door and there it is, and then you want them to get engaged and they're responsible for making it successful, it doesn't work. And so I think that's also part of that answer is what we were saying.
But I think Richard really kind of hit it on the head too, because the problem here is as innovation experts, we know there's a way to take both and actually blend them together and meld them together and make a proper program that fits custom to each organization and how it works. But the problem here is that the executives don't understand that. They think it's one or the other. It's a dichotomy in their head. It's a black and white. And I think our task, in educating industry is to really help them open their eyes and understand, no, there is a way to actually, drive both a very discrete process and maybe top-down innovation and drive bottom-up innovation and engage your entire community and blend these together in a proper way. It's not just one or the other. It can be some of everything.
Right. And it does start at the top. I mean, it has to be led by the CEO and have the mindset of, everyone having that sort of entrepreneurial mindset in the company. It can't just be the innovation officer. That's where it stops, because if the CEO and the board of directors is not on board with that, it doesn't work.
But let me, if I could just take a few seconds to illustrate a specific example of how you have to really mold whatever your approach is to a specific culture or specific company. Even let's just hypothetically say that a special project is set up for any company, XYZ company, and the special project comes up with an incredibly innovative, great idea. Well, that special project group has an incredibly critical function to communicate and assimilate that idea into the organization. That alone has high risk. It has nothing to do with the idea or anything. It is the communication process, the way you talk to the organization, the way you introduce the organization to the new idea, the way you facilitate acceptance of that new idea, minimize personal employee risk or fear of that organization. That is a highly unique endeavor to specific companies.
Yeah,
and it has to be managed properly.
Yeah, you're right, and there's two things there. What Teresa was saying actually ties into your point number 3 there, that innovation really has to start, leadership innovation has to start at the top, has to be integral to the company culture. and the organization's leadership is going to set the tone for that culture and define, how open and receptive it is to these new opportunities and ideas. And ultimately, they're the ones that drive it. They can either nurture it or they can squash it, and they're going to be the ones that do that. But then, like you said, it also takes individuals with actually a very special skill set to be able to take a new opportunity like that and socialize it in the organization and really pitch it and get support for it. And that's why a lot of organizations, when we do innovation programs, will have champions, peppered throughout the organization that serve as innovation champions to really help come along and sponsor some of these and back them. And it really becomes a social movement, if you will, inside the organization to support some of these opportunities.
To your point, Anthony, and Richard and I've been in, and I'm sure you have too, and a number of our, large customers and clients, and when we're working, we're more psychiatrists than we are anything. You really, when you're introducing something new, regardless of how progressive you are, it's uncomfortable potentially because you've got to work into the idea and what's your personal enrollment in what this new initiative is going to be, and am I at risk if we're going to do this? I worked in an organization that was almost all PhDs, and we're working on chat applications, conversational bots, and the PhDs begin to become concerned that they're going to be outplaced with smart AI. And so how do you blend where you're not alienating your organization, but again, you've got to enroll them in this and get them involved so they don't feel at risk. So it's a very important part of the cultural, and Barbara keeps bringing up open innovation. You hear that term more and more. I think it's very important to have that culture at the top set, and open innovation mindset, so you don't feel you're at risk when you're contributing or getting involved.
I would recommend to the listeners of the webinar that to look at some academic literature and academic thought on diffusion of innovation or diffusion of technology. There's specific studies done specifically on that yielded quite a few very specific tools and techniques on how to diffuse innovation or into an organization and without being too risky.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we tend to come up against these corporate antibodies, if you will, that basically is rooted in fear of losing what they have now, and so they want to protect the status quo. And so you do have to kind of find your early adopters and you're very early on the ones who will get behind it and help support it. And eventually the rest of the organization will often come along, but they have to kind of know that there's a safety net for them in the process, and you're not just going to innovate them out of a business unit, innovate them out of a job, and so those are legitimate fears that, professionals have inside of organizations and leaders have, that your innovation is a threat to our existing business. And so, what's the future path? So that's very important. And, I think that ties into a lot of things here, culturally and structurally. And I think just leaders proactively sitting down with the organization and saying, here's the process and here's how we address innovation. And some of these are going to be existential threat to other things we're currently doing, and how does that work out for everyone in those? What's the process? And the more transparency they can give, the more on what the process is, I think the better.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think we'll on the diffusion idea, we'll try to provide some links to specific literature, academic literature on that.
Yeah.
And Anthony, it also brings up the idea of this, this outside in, bringing external players or building an external ecosystem. That also is a risk, right? That's a pretty high risk to the existing employees, and there has to be sensitivity to that. And yet, to ensure that it's viewed as incremental and additive to the organization, and not necessarily a competition or repetitive.
That's a great point. To be honest with you, I hadn't thought about that as much, but bringing in outside resources can obviously feel like a threat as well, particularly if what you're developing with them is an accidental threat to what we're currently doing. But as you point out, as you found in your survey, nevertheless, we're starting to see more and more focus on collaborating with these outside networks of partners, customers, constituents, what we call ecosystem innovation. So I want to hear your thoughts on what's really driving this trend now to focus on outside, open innovation. Why has this become so significant now?
I think there are a couple of things. One, if you even just look at our current COVID environment and how the vaccine was developed, and you can't do it alone, right? We need expertise outside. So I think, that's an example. ESG is another really good example. And I go back to the DuPont, discussion that I heard. If you're looking at sustainability, you have to look at your supply chain, and your suppliers are part of that innovation process potentially in the future. And you're innovating together and coming up with solutions. So I think that's another driver of that outside end. But there's also, a couple of things that were respondent. It's also this founders mentality where, Richard and I've done startups and we've been venture funded. It's a different mentality sometimes than those internally to the organization. You're used to growing a big company from 500 million to $1 billion, but are you used to, or have you ever done the 0 to 50 million? And having that outside in expertise is also starting to be much more recognized. And how do we bring more founder mentality in to help influence our organization in this whole cultural cycle of innovating? Richard, would you add anything to that?
Well, I think there's also a recognition in some of the more sophisticated companies that market disruptions occur in the niche areas. What happens is a niche player comes in, establishes a market that is not interesting to the current competitors or the leaders of that particular marketplace, and establish a going concern, and then begin to grow from that new perspective, and then eventually take over the market. And it's a risk to the established players, and they've seen that time and time again. And so I think they're coming to the realization, hey, we need to get ahead of the game. We need to start reaching out to the small niche players that are doing the kinds of innovation, and work with them, not only for additive innovation, but also to mitigate the risk of being disrupted by that. Perfect example is the current fintech, financial technology marketplace, where fintech apps are popping up all over the place. If you're a big bank or a big financial institution, and you ignore all that at your own, you do it at your own peril. And so I think that's an example where the big banks and the financial institutions are reaching out to that ecosystem and working with them, and either M&A ends up with some M&A activity, or certainly maybe new product offerings, new services, new collaboration.
Yeah, and that's where we encourage, depending on the industry, and we encourage organizations to consider some sort of corporate venturing initiative, where you are investing in and partnering with different startups who are trying things that you would never try in-house. They're out there on the edge, and they have a radical new business model or a radical new approach with the technology that your traditional organization might never try. Well, invest in them, partner with them, because I see it as an insurance policy. What if what they're doing really takes off and becomes the next wave of our industry? We want to be invested in that. We want to be a part of it, and we want to join them, not be defeated by them. And that may, we may just end up buying them, making a new business unit, and closing the old business unit, and that becomes the future of our organization. So, an absolutely great insurance policy.
I think that's a great point, Anthony. Is do you have to do the whole innovation inside, or projects that Richard and I've worked on? It's do we build it? Do we buy it? Do we, and so that whole idea of venture studio or internal venture capital where you're actually looking at all these new little niche players and you're deciding, do we buy one? Do we actually invest in it and help them grow until it gets to a point? But there's so many different options there that without the right team and without the right processes and foundation in place, that becomes a wasted cycle because you're just, again, tapping into hundreds of ideas and hundreds of startups without a plan. So I think it goes back to starting at the top. What's the ultimate plan and strategy? So you incorporate all that.
Right. As with your innovation program in general, you need to start with the strategy. You know, where is it we want to go with innovation? What do we want to do? How do we want to grow? How do we want to leverage it? How are we going to get there? What vehicles are we going to use? You need a complete strategy around all that. Absolutely. And that actually kind of brings me back to another point you found in your survey here. Number 10, about how they felt the resources placed to catch new innovative ideas. And Richard, you mentioned that organizations are good at execution, but maybe less so at catching. But I would argue slightly with you. I would argue that they're good at executing what they do today. They're not always good at executing new stuff that isn't developed yet. And so what I see is organizations, they have a great machine for executing what they do today. And they actually have a great innovation management process for catching new ideas. But where they tend to fall down is in actually taking those new ideas and actually executing the new stuff, the new ideas. And either they execute it wrong, they execute for the wrong customer, they define it wrong, they got the wrong go-to-market strategy, the timing's wrong, something's not right. So in my experience, I see organizations struggle with how to execute the new stuff. And catching ideas, that's great, but a lot of those ideas just end up dead, So I'll let you guys comment on what your thoughts.
No, Anthony, that's a very good point. But it does illustrate that the survey, right? We're asking the executives,
okay,
where are they? And it's exactly right. Is they feel very confident that they can catch ideas, that they can execute on innovations because they're an execution machine. But you're right, their perspective is what they're executing now on, that they've created the efficiencies on their current products or their current services, and that throwing something new at them doesn't, I'm not sure they realize the extent of process, redefinition and execution priorities that come along with that new innovation. But I completely agree. You're right that they feel they got it covered. That they can handle anything that the organization needs because they're all running a fine-tuned machine. But that's that gets disrupted. But then that goes back to our previous points, which is it's how you work with someone like that, how you introduce the new innovation into the leadership of that execution process, and how well that innovation is going to end up being.
But there really is an art to that whole execution process, indeed. And Barbara commented here, the new idea needs resources, not just money, but the time and space from the team. And it does, and I think she's 100% right. It needs support. It needs, just support in the organization and people helping to get behind it and supporting it, and the time and space to work on it, and the right skill set from the people executing and leading it to deliver that. And I wanted to go somewhere with that, but Teresa, I think you wanted to jump in.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the point that in Rolls, I talked to the chief innovation officer at Rolls-Royce. One of his core challenges is commercialization. Now, in the auto industry, historically, you know how to commercialize your products, but in new innovations, if you don't have, again, at the very top, an understanding of what commercialization means and what all those resource needs are, and put it in context of the business, sort of the business plan. It doesn't need to be in a formal plan as you're getting it out there. I think that's where the breakdown becomes too. It's like when you're piloting this commercialization process, you're looking at a process that you're just not going to get an ROI immediately. So those resources you're putting to execution is very different in a commercialization of a brand new innovative idea. And you've got to have patience for that, plain and
It is.
simple.
You're right. And the skill set to incubate new ideas and the go-to-market strategy and how to get them launched and to grow them from a seed up to a real business is really a very different skill set than growing our current business. You know, it's totally different. Which actually brings me to your eighth key finding here, and one I really wanted to hit on hard here is innovation skills are in high demand, especially in the existing employees. So, you know, that's what our findings suggest. But how are organizations actually going about building those skills? Is there any sort of organized effort toward training and professional certification and special assignments or conferences or what? Or are these leaders just sort of randomly leaving it to the people to go read some books about innovation on their own and hope for the best? You know, it seems to me that if these leaders are really serious about developing those skills, then they're going to be far more intentional or organized about actually building them into the organization. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's going on there.
Well, I have two thoughts on that. One is the way I read that particular response from the executives was that they valued those skills in a new employee. So
Okay.
it was almost a hiring strategy as opposed to any employee development. So I think they have a long way to go on that for sure. The other idea is, and I gave a talk recently on this, is the development of translational intelligence. You know, everybody, you talk about your job and the buzzwords are emotional intelligence. Can you read the room? Can you work with lots of different people, diverse people? You have to have emotional intelligence. Well, I think with innovation, you have to have translational intelligence. How can you translate this innovation among, with people in an organization, and how do you carry that forward? Commercialization involves an unbelievable array of skills and aptitudes, and translational intelligence is really part of that. But just to sum up, I think, Anthony, that they looked as if they could go out and buy that innovation expertise.
I won't say which executive made mention of what company this is, but they put it in context of if we don't see a particular group of people or department having the skills that are going to transform us in the future, we just let them focus on productivity. Those that have the high skills that we see and that we can depend on in the future, we take those, and those become our more innovation-oriented participants, if you will. And I thought that was interesting because there was no discussion of upskilling those that were sitting on the other side.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, why is that? I mean, do the leaders not understand that you have the ability to upskill your existing staff and teach them how to do innovation? Is that missing?
It's a very good question. I don't know if I don't know the answer to it.
Yeah.
I think in some cases it's looked at as an expense. Am I going to put budget to a training to upskill, or is it cheaper to hire the skills already in? We're looking at, we continue to talk about a talent shortage, and I think there's some headway in this, in that you're seeing that we're not going to hire the MBAs anymore. We want to bring them in, and we want to train these individuals in. So there may be a shift starting to happen in that regard, but it's a good point, and I don't have the answer.
Because that's really what Global Innovation Institute is about developing that skill set amongst your workforce and upskilling your workforce. I mean, because I see it like this. I mean, every organization has a training and development budget, and regardless of what the subject is, you're going to send your people, most of them anyway, to some sort of training and development. The question is, in what areas are you upskilling? And obviously, we're always wanting to upskill people in soft skills like communication and leadership and so forth. But then, people also tend to get upskilled in different hard skills like project management and so forth, or technology. So, I think it's just a realization and an awakening that needs to happen inside of senior leadership that, hey, innovation is a subject area that we can upskill people in, both from the science of it and the art of it. And, let's start bringing in, the training and the certification around innovation. And we can actually significantly elevate our innovation maturity and capability by educating and certifying our people and bringing that upskilling in. So I think that's an awakening that needs to happen.
And
It
it
also
can't
may
be-
be aware. Go ahead, Richard. Sorry.
and just to follow up on that, and it can't be just, it can't be just, uh, upscaling innovation awareness to key people. It has to be pervasive in the organization. Otherwise, you just isolate it and end up with, with still the major problem of how to communicate innovation throughout the organization. You really have to get at the very lowest, the entire organization, top to bottom, and awareness of innovation and how it evolves and how to facilitate it as an individual within that organization.
Thank
And
you.
sometimes we've found that could be the CEOs needing also to have that upskill. And so they don't want to have the recognition that they themselves don't feel like they have the skills to take this forward. It's easier. It's just a mentality thing, right?
Yeah. And that's why we have certified chief innovation officer to teach the executive. Anyway, we're starting to run down on time. I wanted to open it up to the attendees to see if they had any more questions that they wanted to ask of Richard and Teresa. You can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it into the chat window here. If you have any other questions here for Richard and Teresa. And I'll watch that. But in the meantime, I guess if they don't, I'll leave us with one last question I have we can answer and work on, and then we'll start to wrap it up. And it's this question. So, and it relates to your 11th point about the stigma. So, that many still feel the stigma of innovation failure and how it hurts their career. So, in your perspective, do you see any hope in life for this? Is there going to be a new generation, maybe with millennials or Gen Z, that finally they bring into the realization that our best workers are the ones that, as I say, plow new fields and try new things, and even though they fell at them, and they're not the people who are just trying things over and over and over and are doing the same things over, but trying new stuff. So when is our leadership going to wake up to this and, as I say, stop being corporate zombies, but really embrace people and support the people and encourage the people that try new things?
I'll give you my quick perspective and let Richard chime in. I'm seeing a shift, but I think it's in conversations like this and getting much more involvement from the C-suite on how, especially now, right, that this transformation of their companies, they're going to get disrupted. They're going to continue to get disrupted faster. And if they don't have the confidence in their team to be able to carry innovation forward, they'll all fail. So, if they fail, I fail becomes a real big incentive to start to get rid of that stigma. Personally, that's what I'm hearing. And I believe that outside-in influences are coming in to support that, educating the C-suite, educating and organizations like yourself, where you are bringing process and more ability to be accountable for success along that path in a realistic process timeframe. So I think those things will help a lot.
Okay.
I'm just to follow up on that. I'm very hopeful that will change, and I would anticipate that it changes not only from a demographic standpoint, younger workers being much more inclined to think out of the box and be a little bit rebellious on what they're doing, but also that there's some key successes in the marketplace that demonstrate how failure can be beneficial. I mean, I spoke earlier about SpaceX. Well, there's a case study out on SpaceX and NASA, two completely different cultures. I mean, completely different. And NASA in the beginning thought SpaceX was crazy because they kept doing things that broke or that blew up, but they kept moving. They moved so quickly that now NASA is a believer in that type, even within the context of rocket launch and space activity. So
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Any closing, last, final comments for either one of you that you'd like to say before we wrap it up?
No, for me, I think this has been terrific. I've thoroughly enjoyed. It's such an important topic, and there's no question that it's a future topic. It continues to get much more attention, and I applaud GI's efforts in making sure that there's a structured way to do it. That the material is fantastic. So certainly happy to be associated with it.
I absolutely agree. I think, Anthony, your efforts are really pivotal in this process, and are I could see how much more if organizations just were encouraged to go get certifications and to get educated, that it would be very helpful. And it's part of the change of the culture.
Indeed. Well, very good. Thank you so much again, Richard and Teresa. We really appreciate having you here with us today and your feedback. And Barbara just gave you a thumbs up, right?
Yeah, and thanks, Barbara, for all your comments, and everyone for asking.
And also to Aoi and Roxit and for your comments. Our pleasure to bring this. So we will follow up with everyone that registered for the webinar. We'll send out this presentation and the recording of the webinar, and you can view it afterwards. So with that, I thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.